North Africa played a crucial role in the Second World War for several strategic, economic, and political reasons. It was the main battleground for control of the Mediterranean, giving its victor major advantages in the war. If the Axis were to capture all of North Africa, they would cut off Britain's easy access to the Middle East and open a new front in Iraq and Iran. Both these countries had disdain for the British and their colonial rule, and even revolted. The oil wells and reserves in these areas were of paramount importance. Furthermore, it would potentially allow an attack on the Caucasus from the south, which may have allowed the Axis to capture Baku in 1941 or 42 in conjunction with Fall Blau by bypassing the Caucasus Mountains, which gave the 1st Panzer Army and the 17th Army such grief in crossing, increasing Fall Blau's chances of success dramatically. Cutting the Suez would also have had consequences, forcing shipping to travel longer distances around Africa, though this was already happening to some extent, as it was a safer journey than passing through the contested Mediterranean Sea. However, a lot of these factors were overlooked by the Axis powers early in the war, and they would pay dearly for it. June 10th, 1940. Germany has taken Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. France is about to fall. Italy wants to join in at this seemingly opportunistic time. They attacked France in the south. The French inflicted heavy losses on the Italians. So far, Italy had failed to have a show of strength and was eager to prove itself. Enter North Africa. After the fall of France, this was the only location the Commonwealth could fight the Axis on the ground. With the exception of Ethiopia, it became a focal point in the eyes of the British and a place they could redeem themselves for their defeat in France. Italy saw it as a place to prove themselves and also territory for them to include in their new Roman Empire. Germany showed little interest in this area as their focus was preparing for the invasion of Eastern Europe. They were also, at the time, preoccupied with the Battle of Britain and preparing for their planned invasion of the British homeland, which would never come to be. The days following the declaration of war, the British conducted reconnaissance in force across the border, driving deep into Italian territory with scouting forces. They even managed to capture the Italian general Lastucci in doing so. However, the British knew their force was too small at this point for any real offensive, so they pulled back most of it to Mersa Matrua as a reserve. Graziani, the general of the 10th Italian Army, was instructed by Mussolini to essentially invade Egypt and march forward, without much clarification. Operazione E. In desert warfare, the most important factor by far is logistics. The long stretches of desert, the heat and the sand can quickly break down an advancing chain of supply. If an army is unprepared for the task, too large to fully supply, or cut off from it, it can be absolutely paralyzing. The war here will be won by whoever controlled the highway and the ports. Graziani questionably decided to invade with a large on-foot force, which would be a nightmare to supply, and incredibly slow, rather than invading with a smaller, motorized group that would be easier to supply and fast. The main Italian force, which consisted largely of conscripted Libyans, would march down the main highway, whilst the mobile Maletti group would flank them in the desert. The Maletti group held most of the Italian armour in the 10th Army. However, the Maletti group almost immediately got lost in the desert and wasn't able to get going again until an Italian plane located them. Once they do get going, they go at a snail's pace, as they want the infantry to keep up with the armour. The British essentially let them advance, as they had a counter-attack planned near Mersa Matrua. They harassed them with sporadic fire and patrols, inflicting casualties. The British are actually hoping the Italians will make it to Mersa Matrua so they can unleash their trap, which is the mentioned armoured counterattack. But alas, the Italians are saved by their own logistical incompetence, as their supply chain can stretch no further than Sidi Barrani. They are forced to dig in. What follows is a mini phony war, with no one making any major moves for months and months until December, when Operation Compass begins. Operation Compass. The British 7th Armoured Division makes its way from Mersa Matrua with the support of the 4th Indian Division. A small British detachment called the Selby Force would hold the coastal road. The armour filters through a gap in the Italian lines and catches the Italian Maletti group by surprise, wiping out their tank forces. The British then reach the coast west of Sidi Barrani with the help of the British Navy, cutting off a lot of troops. The pocket is then squeezed and surrenders. Astonishingly, the Indians are withdrawn from the fight to be redeployed elsewhere in this crucial moment. They are to be replaced by the Australian 6th Division, but have to wait until they arrive. The British now decide whether to keep up the pursuit with less forces, or stop the advance. They decide to wait for the Australians, giving the Italians vital time to reinforce Bardia and Tobruk. With the fresh Australians, they push on and encircle Bardia, whilst the armour rushes ahead. The Australians have their first major engagement of the war by attacking Bardia. They take it with some tank support, largely in part to the effectiveness of the Australian sappers or engineers. 40,000 Italians were either captured, wounded or killed for the cost of 500 Australians, an 80-to-1 ratio, an unbelievable result for their first engagement. They then move to take Tobruk, and they take it, just like Bardia, with another rapid attack, utilising the Australian engineers and the British armour. The Italians, now in full retreat, make their way west via the highway. The 7th Armoured Division then pulls off a risky manoeuvre by crossing the mostly unmapped deep desert area. After some initial trouble, they manage to reach Massus, with the Australians chasing the Italians via the coastal road. A fast, wheeled, forward detachment of the 7th Armoured Division races ahead of the rest of the 7th Armoured and reaches the road around 30 minutes before the Italians. Incredible timing. They then hold off the Italian breakout attempts until the bulk of the forces arrives. They all attack and crush the remainder of the Italian 10th Army. Operation Compass was a stunning and often overlooked British victory. They captured over 130,000 Italians and destroyed 380 tanks with only 36,000 men and no more than 2,000 casualties. It was an excellent entrance for the Australian and Indian forces, who had more than proved themselves in their baptism by fire. The Allies were unable to advance any further than Mersa Brega, as they had outrun their logistical lifeline, and the arrival of the Africa Corps in Tripoli changed the situation. They were ordered over to the defensive. 1940 saw the opening of the North African front. However, 1941 will shift it into full swing, with the German armour entering the playing field and an aggressive German general named Rommel bringing the tactics he used to help take down France the year prior. Stay tuned for when I release the 1941 video sometime in the near future. Consider subscribing if you enjoyed the video.